Wondering how you can become better at running your business? Entrepreneurship can be stressful. There's too much to do and not enough time. If you're isolated in your daily decisions, have no fear. Success and balance are possible. Welcome to the Small Business Answer Man podcast, where you master the art of running a successful business using practical advice from experts who want to help you succeed. Now, here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Well, welcome. We're glad to have you back again. It's hard to believe it's already 2024, but we're rolling right along. And my goal this quarter was to find you guests that can make a difference for your business. And remember, I like talking about that 6P business owner formula, which is people, productivity, pricing, promotion, process, and profits. And today we've got a guest with you that's going to help us in that area also. So I want to really share with you, what problem, Bocar, would you share with my audience? What problem will you help them solve today?
So one of the things that I spend a lot of time focusing on as a partner at Form Ventures, so we're an early stage fund that invests in a lot of early stage entrepreneurs. And what I often see is that the approach that entrepreneurs take in the 0 to 1 phase, which I define as the phase prior to product market fit, is generally has to be very different from how you sell once you've actually reached product market fit. So that's the problem I'd like to talk about today.
Well, this is going to be a fun conversation because a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with that. But today we've got with us Bocar Diat. He's with us. He's a partner at Form Ventures, sitting at the intersection of investing and working one-on-one with portfolio founders through the early stages of building, including going to market, founder-led sales, and fundraising. Bocar, would you share with us a little bit? It's great to have you on the podcast, but share a little bit. You talked about some of that problem. Why do you think that's so important to you with what you're doing in the marketplace?
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me. So maybe I'll just touch on my background a little bit, because I think this is going to help shine a light on why I'm so obsessed with this problem. I always wanted to be in tech. I did more for technical education because I thought at the time that that's what you needed to get into tech. But turns out I spent most of my time on the business side. I was lucky enough to start my career at a company that ended up being pretty successful, where I learned quite a bit, called Hootsuite. I was in the first kind of 10 employees and in the first sales team as well. And I joined the company when we were pre-revenue. So we had a product, we had no revenue. Fast forward to 8 years later, when I left the company, we're at around 150 million in revenue that we're doing. And most of my time at the company was actually spent launching go-to-market for new products and new markets. And really, that's kind of what opened my eyes to what a sales motion or go-to-market motion should look like when you're getting started with a product or problem, as opposed to once you've actually already figured out that the problem is real and you've got a bit of a process and you're scaling. Very different motions. I was a founder myself as well, so I could empathize with entrepreneurs on the line. I know what it's like to have that idea and want to get it going, but there's a few proof points that you need in order for investors to take a look at your business and actually believe in it and invest in you. After that, I was an operator again, but for the better part of the last 15 years, I've really been advising early stage founders on how to get to that first $1 million in revenue or that first $10 million in revenue. And that is the question that I'm obsessed with. And I get to do it day in, day out as part of my job today at Form Ventures, where we partner with entrepreneurs, invest in them, and really help them get to that first revenue.
Yeah. And that's so important, because one thing about small businesses, the majority of them do not get, I forget what the percentage is, but do not even get to $1 million in gross revenue. And for a lot of them, they struggle. So I think this is going to be a very practical conversation, because one thing I'm trying to tell them in 2024, what we put in place now benefits us for the rest of the year and next year, of course, as you go on. And
Yeah.
you've seen some of that growth with a hyper growth with what Hootsuite did of growing to 150 million. So I think it being be so practical. Let's start with really maybe more of a, I'm going to say, maybe I don't want to say a base question, but more of a kind of the foundational question is, how do we start identifying our target customer and really starting to match that product market fit that we need to have create that success in the marketplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me touch on, so for the audience, I tend to work a lot more with software businesses. That being said, I think a lot of the concept that I'm going to talk about today are broadly applicable because there are some common pitfalls that I see, even with companies that sometimes are building hardware, as an example, or in different spaces. Here's the thing, Gary, that I find that is missed the most. Before we even talk about building a business and go to market, I think the first thing that folks forget is that if you're building, you've identified, you've got an idea, you're trying to solve a particular pain point, right? That's generally where ideas come from, right? You experienced it or you witnessed it, and you want to build a product to help solve that challenge. A lot of the times, I think what's missed is that a lot of entrepreneurs don't actually take the time to validate not just that pain point is real, especially if they've experienced it themselves, but validate that it's acute enough of a pain point, number one, for folks to want to spend money to solve for that problem. So whatever the idea is, people need to be able to, you're running a business, right? People need to be able to look at your product and go, yes, here's my money. Please solve my problem, right? I know it sounds trivial, but that's number one. And then number two is really making sure that there's enough customers in your geography or in the world that experience that pain point in the acute way that we talked about. Sounds trivial, but here's what I actually see happen quite a bit is that, for example, I'll meet folks that used to be, call it a product manager at a company before, and experience a problem. Go talk to their buddies that are also product managers, right? And realize that, yes, we have the same problem, and they build this product. They get some early, proof points and validation, and then they go out to fundraise, right? And what some investors will look at is, you have any customers, you have a real pain point. But what happens is that if you didn't validate that there's enough customers to actually buy your product, invariably at some point you're going to be in this plateau situation where it's actually even worse when you've actually already raised capital, because then the expectation is growth. And if you didn't validate that the market is real, then you're going to be in a very hard spot, right? So thing number one that I would say before even going to think about building a business, validate and confirm that there's a real market pain. And if you're in a venture scale business, make sure that that market pain is conducive to a venture scale outcome, meaning that there's enough customers in the world that will use this product to actually warrant a $1 billion outcome or $100 million in revenue outcome, right? So that's what I think of as phase one. Right.
Yeah.
So
Right.
then get out of the building. And so how you do that is that you get out of the building and you talk to customers and you validate that not only that the problem is real, but that they're willing to pay money for it. Right. And once you've done that, then and only then do you move into what I think of as stage two, which is, now that you've validated that this is real, now you need to kind of start translating that into something that will help you build a product, right? So there's a second set of questions that you have, and a second set of prospects that you're going to go out and have conversations with, where you're really trying to narrow in on the specific high priority problems in order to know what that minimum product that can solve the problem is going to look like, right? And generally you can do this in different ways, but in a lot of ways it's really about just kind of really understanding the day-to-day of folks. And if you're in the software space, and even if you're not in the software space, I would argue a really good book to read is a book called The Mom Test. which is a book that's a very tactical book that gives you an understanding of how to conduct conversations when you don't have a product with customers to validate that you've got a real, business idea and a real product idea there, right? So that would be what I think of as stage two. Then stage three is starting to design and iterate on a potential solution or prototype to share to customers until they're comfortable with it. And then you'll partner with some of those customers, right, to launch V1 of your product. And once you've got something that's actually delivering value to those customers, and only then do you start thinking about, okay, let's start selling to other customers or adopters and continuing to develop and optimize this product. So very long way to say there's a process there and there's steps and gates that you generally need to think about. And notice that a lot of the things that I've talked about there, if you're somebody that was in sales before, don't really sound like what you would typically do in a sales process. And that was the whole point. It's very different as to how you approach customers early stage.
Yeah, I tell you, and so important, it doesn't matter in what you said earlier. Yeah, you're in the software space, but what you just shared for any entrepreneur that has an idea, sometimes what happens is they get too excited about it and they talk about it to, number one, family. That's never always good because, of course, they're going to tell you why it doesn't work, and that can sometimes shut people down. Or number two, they'll talk to the people that they know very well that's in that space. So, of course, it's kind of like you said, they're not validating it outside of it. They're validating it with a small group of people that, oh, yeah, this is needed in the marketplace. And then they're not going through with it and doing that research and before they start, because there's so many good ideas out there. And the reason I say not to listen to family, because the problem is family is always trying to protect you. I was in the mobile phone industry, which is now the wireless industry. My dad told me I was crazy, but now everybody carries a computer in the palm of their hand and stuff.
Yeah.
If I would have listened to him, I would have never went forward with it. And you've got to listen to what they're trying to tell you. But the thing is, you can't let that stop you. And I love the idea of validating, because does the marketplace need this besides this group of 5, 10, 20 people telling you yes? And then what you said behind that is really then asking that next set of questions in stage two of what are their pains and really digging into that before you really even build the product. Or for some, that may be a product they're selling someone else. Well, then to go to market to that product that's there. So some great things. And then that solution beta tape, especially in software, there's a lot of beta testing. You're going to try that product out on people that's willing to work with you there. Be those earlier adopters that's there. So some great information. I appreciate you sharing that. Now, to me, one of the things, and this happens all the time in your world, a lot of time you call them founders, we call them entrepreneurs in here. And what they do is what they get wrong when they go to selling, because the problem is for a lot of people, that's not their trait. I mean, that's a skill. You can learn it, and I believe anyone can, but a lot of times founders and entrepreneurs make mistakes when they start trying to sell their product. So can you give me share your information, what you believe in that area?
So I'll say one thing and I'll expand on it later. Surprisingly, with most founders that I work with, they don't realize that they already have the skill sets to build the initial product, because generally they're builders. They'll be technical, or they'll have some prior experience in the space where they are. I think it comes from a misconception or a misunderstanding of what sales actually is, right? Which is really actually about helping a customer buy your product in order to solve a problem, as opposed to this notion of, type A car salesmen that are there to convince you to buy something, if that makes sense, right? So that I'll say that as a general statement, and I'll unpack it. But let me describe really quickly how 0 to 1 selling can be different from a selling process once you already have an established product, as an example, right? Where I see a lot of entrepreneurs get tripped up is that if you think about the process that I described earlier, right? Like you have that first conversation with customers where you're validating that the problem is real, right? Then you had that second conversation where you're showing them a bunch of different solutions to land on a potential solution to the problem. It kind of sounds like a sales process when you think about it, right? Because you've had that first problem discovery call, and then you've had that demo maybe, right? And then what they do is that they'll go ahead and send a bunch of proposals, and 90% of the time, those things go nowhere, right? The reason
Exactly.
for it is that you're actually not fully in a sales process yet, because what you have not done is qualified that customer, right?
Mm.
Because when you think about it, that first set of conversation is really about, hey, we think this problem exists in the world. Do you have it? And would you be willing to pay some money to solve it? Then it's like, okay, here are some potential solutions to solving that problem. What do you think? And then you get feedback. So really what you're doing is that you're seeking feedback, right? For the most part, right? But at that point, you would have talked to 30, 40, 50 customers. And really your job is to now actually qualify and figure out which one of those 30, 40, 50 customers you're actually going to focus on to actually partner with to build this first product. And this is where sales comes back in, because you want to make sure. So we use the MEDIC qualification framework, which I think is a really good one to use. So it's metrics, economic buyer, decision criteria, decision process, identify pain, champion, competition, right? But effectively, it's really just, you can look it up. It's a very good framework, but it's effectively making sure that you're focusing on the actual customers that will have the highest likelihood of closing, and also getting value from what you're delivering, right? So quick example of how that's different. So actually the real process is not, does not start, with you seeking feedback. The real process, and yes, it's still discovery, but don't think of them as pipeline until you've qualified them. I know it sounds like an obvious sale thing to say, but people get tripped up when it comes to a process, because they think of it as just actions and motions rather than actually thinking about milestones, which is what questions have we answered and are we ready to start working with this customer. And when you think about what I've just described, if I go back to what I said earlier, I'll meet a lot of founders that used to be product managers, as an example, right? And when you think of what I've described, I'd much rather a product manager having these conversations with their customer than a salesperson, because this is actually their job. Their job is to have conversations about what customers, what about the problems, and really dig in to really understand what the intricacies are, and then come up with potential solutions to solve those problems. Most salespeople are not very good at that, right? But technical folks and product folks are actually very good. So what I find is that generally there is a misunderstanding of what actually needs to be true in order for you to be able to be successful in this motion. And I can give you a bit of a sense as well of what there is. Some selling that you need to learn as an entrepreneur, but it's much less than most people think, right? I actually would focus mostly on building that playbook, and I'm happy to expand on what I mean by the initial playbook. But fundamentally, the skill sets I find are actually already there. It's just that folks don't exactly know that those are the skills that you need to deploy in order to have the right conversations.
Yeah, I think that becomes so important. And, one thing is we get excited because we think we have a bunch of prospects. And like you said, we think they're in the pipeline. But until you really qualify, number one, you've heard, I'm sure, Dream 100 and all these, you go after your Dream 100 clients. But until you really qualify them, you don't have a Dream 100 client list. You may have 100 names, but you don't have 100 people that truly after your products and stuff. And when you qualify, plus that gives you the time too to find out your product. Maybe for some people, they want it to do something else, but it's a small segment of that group. So you can disqualify them. And I think that's sometimes we forget in sales, that for us as the person selling it, we also can disqualify them, but we've got to listen to what they tell us in each one of those areas. And you were talking a little bit about those skills, and I thought maybe we'd go there with founders and entrepreneurs that they need to have to really go to start their go-to-market strategy. And I think everything applies to everybody that we're talking about here. Doesn't matter if you're in software sales or what type of business you're in, this applies to them and stuff. So when we think about that, skills that we need for entrepreneurs and founders, what are some of those things that they need to have to really be able to go to market in that strategy?
So the founding journey is a never, it's you're going to be learning forever, right? It's a learning journey, right? So I think I'll maybe just focus on the things that I think you need to learn early, because there's other things that you'll need to learn later, right?
Sure.
In order to really think about that foundation of building your motion, when I think about it, there's really only four things that you need to be very good at, right? One is that you need to have a good enough way of getting in front of customers, so prospecting or whatever your motion is, right? Meaning that you might need to learn how to send some emails, run an outbound process, really figure out the right way to message things if you're sending emails and how to do it, right? But I think of it as, learn prospecting, right? That's number one. Number two is really being intentional about discovery and how you have conversations with customers. Right? So what I generally find is that the skill set is already there generally with folks that are builders to uncover problems in order to know what product to build. But what is often missing is the questions that are a little bit more on the commercialization side that really gets them to the nitty gritty of, is there a budget there? Who are the stakeholders going to be? How do we go from here to actually partnering with you? And also, more importantly, and I should have said this first, it's actually going from problem definition to translating that into actual ROI and impact that your product is going to solve. And, I have yet to find somebody show me something that's different than the four things that I think of as value. You're either helping a company make money, you're either helping them save money, mitigate some type of risk, right? So think about regulations, fines, and that sort of thing, or you're dramatically improving some type of productivity experience, right? And if you can tie it back to one of those things, then you can say, hey, if you use my product, or if we solve for this, this is what impact this is going to have on you. And if you miss that, then you're gonna have a harder time selling to that customer, because if I tell you that I've saved you, $200,000, but I'm only charging you 20,000, then you're not gonna think about the 20,000, right? But if I don't demonstrably show you that I've saved you 200K and then I'm just charging you 20K, then you're gonna be asking me all sorts of questions. All right. So that's kind of one thing. So be very deliberate about the discovery and how you have the conversation. Have a good method of tying that pain point to the solution. So presenting the solution and making sure that a customer in front of you kind of gets it once they see your product, to understand how that product solves their problem. Right. So that's number three. And then more importantly, and this is, I think, something that is not talked about enough, whether it's in software, by the way, or I think in brick and mortar or other types of businesses. Ideally, you want to create some loyalty, or you want to make sure that your customers are actually getting the value so that they can either renew with you, buy from you again, or talk about their friends about the experience that they had with you. And very often I find that entrepreneurs will make sure that they take the time to figure out how to close a customer, but you also need a playbook to ensure that you know how to ensure that that customer is actually getting value and is actually happy about whatever it is that you sold them, right? Because if that's not there, you're going to have a very hard time scaling your business. So those are the four things. Do you have a prospecting guide? Do you have a discovery guide? Do you have a presentation guide? And do you have a customer success guide? And the skills underneath that are really, in my mind, the things that you learn.
Yeah. Wow. That right there is a sales lesson, folks, that he just gave us. And it's so true, because if you don't do those things, it's not going to drive the business forward. And it doesn't matter if you're selling software or if you're selling an actual product, if you're making widgets, It does not matter. You have to have that process. And as an entrepreneur, that's the thing. We get excited about something, but then we really don't think through the rest of it that we talked about earlier. So some great information. I really appreciate you sharing that, because what we've done is we've covered one of our P's big time here is pricing. For me,
Yeah.
that is all about sales.
Right.
Got to have a P, so you got to make it fit in your 6P formula here that I have. But it's all about the sales that you're generating in the business. And if you can't generate the sales, you don't have a business.
That's it.
Doesn't matter what product that you go out there for, and it becomes so important. So one thing I will tell people, they may say, well, I've been listening to this, but I'm all ready to go to market. Then the question is look at the products you currently have and what needs to be retooled in some of those. Maybe there's some changes that need to be made for you to go to market in those products, that your marketing needs to go a different way. And that goes back to your qualifying the customers and really asking the right questions for them, because maybe that market is not hitting the sales numbers you want. I just was on a webinar yesterday and I was listening to it. And with our strategic plan, what's our 3 economic indicators that we want to move forward this next year? Well, if we sit there and really decide that, then maybe we need to adjust some of that go-to-market strategy for each one of those. I think you and I, Bocar, could talk for a while, because we have both enjoyed this conversation. I love the conversation of sales. And I really appreciate you coming on, because I know you're in the software industry, but you're really giving your background of sales in general to us. And I just appreciate you giving that. I know you do have a capability for them to go to your all's website. Would you share that information? And we'll have it in show notes for them also.
Sure. For those of you listening and that are thinking about starting a business, mostly in the software space, we're an early stage fund, so we're a New York-based fund. We invest in about 100 companies a year at a very early stage, and we'll write checks up to. We've got an accelerator that can help companies really learn the basics and the foundations of starting a business and getting to some initial customer traction and then fundraising. And we also have a pre-seed fund, and all in all, we'll write checks between 250 and 750, just kind of generally speaking, into those companies very early. Very easy to find. Bocar Dia is my name, so BOCARDIA. You can find me on LinkedIn, and forumvc.com is the website as well for Forum. If you've got an idea, you can go on there and pitch us. There's a button that's going to be saying pitch us on there when you go. But yeah, all to say, but also always happy to answer questions more generally about entrepreneurship and sales as well. So feel free to reach out.
Yeah. And please do check that out. If you're thinking about creating something, this is your first part, because if you can't pitch your product, you got a challenge already, and we've given you a lot of tools to be able to go forward and do that. Now, before I let you go, Bocar, one thing I want to ask you is, I ask every guest the same question. What would be your best business advice or tip that you would give to entrepreneurs and business owners?
I'm somebody who's very, one, customer focused. You'll notice that everything that I've talked about today goes back to validating things in and around the customer. That would be one. And then two, I'm also somebody that's very, because of my technical, I guess, education, I'm a very data-driven and experimental person. And here's what I would say when it comes to running or building businesses. Run as many experiments as you can initially. And I think that's kind of the mindset that you have to have, is an experimental mindset, where when you think about the scientific method, it's you have a set of assumptions, you run an experiment to validate that or not, and then based on your results, you'll either run another experiment or optimize, right? A lot of the times what I find is that entrepreneurs will have a plan. They don't think of it as an experiment. You just kind of have a plan, and it's very linear. And it'll just kind of go through the motions of really following that plan and executing on that. And in my mind, you should have a set of experiments and gates instead, because that's really how you validate and get to the proof points that will help you get to where you need to get to. Because the founding journey, in my experience, has never been linear, right?
Yeah.
And plans change, right? What's the saying that everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face? Well, if you've got an experiment, you're just expecting that things may not work out. So it's a better way to run a business.
Yeah, great advice. I appreciate you sharing that, because business owners and entrepreneurs, you need to know that things are going to change this year. We don't know what's in store for 2024. So instead, you still got to have a plan. But the thing is, be willing to adjust that plan as you go. Bocar, I appreciate you so much for coming on. Again, it's forumvc.com. We'll have all that in show notes where you can click to it. We'll have his connection to LinkedIn there available for you. So please connect with Bocar on the information. But thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Gary. It was fun.
Well, I enjoyed bringing this guest with you, really talking about sales and that pricing model of what we've got to think about as we put out there each and every day. So thank you for joining us on the podcast. It's all the time we have. But next time, I want you to go out there each day and continue to grow your business. Remember, you don't ascend to the top of the mountain by yourself. When you help others achieve their success, you find significance in your life. Go out each day and make it a great day. We'll have another great guest for you next week, so come back and join us. Make it a great day. Thanks for joining us.
That's all the time we have for this week. To continue your journey, head over to smallbusinessanswerman.biz to access the tools and resources mentioned in today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with someone who would benefit from listening. That's smallbusinessanswerman.biz. Until next time, remember, when you find the right solutions, your business grows and you get your time back.